She hadn't meant to cry in front of a stranger, least of all a cowboy who looked like he hadn't had a full meal in days. Mara Dawson stood on her porch, boots sinking slightly into the damp, splintering boards, arms crossed tight over her chest like that could hold her world together. The wind carried the dry, sharp smell of manure and dust, same as it always had, but something in her gut told her everything was changing. Again, the man at the bottom of her steps wasn't much to look at. Tall but hollowed out from hunger, face shadowed by a wide hat pulled low. His clothes were worn soft with time and hard work, the sleeves patched more than once, the boots cracked near the toe. He didn't meet her eyes, not yet, just stared past her shoulder like maybe he didn't believe he was really here. Or maybe he was too proud to ask. "You the one posted that job on the notice board in town?" he asked, voice rough but low, like he hadn't spoken much lately. She nodded. "Fence repair. I can't offer more than $1 a day. And that's pushing it." He looked up then, and for a second she saw something in his eyes, something tired, something needing. "I'll take it." And that should have been the end of it. Just a fence, just a job, just another soul passing through. But Mara didn't move. Her hands clenched tighter. The words rolled out of her without permission. "I can feed you too," she muttered. "If you don't mind cold beans and bad coffee." He gave a small nod. No thank you. No smile. Just a nod, like he didn't want to draw attention to the fact he needed the offer. She watched him as he walked toward the broken post line stretching along the west side of her land. Shoulders sloped from more than just the weight of the tools he carried. He looked like a man who'd slept in ditches and under trees. A man who hadn't had a place to be for longer than he could remember. Mara turned back into the house, chest tight, her throat scratchy. She meant to hire someone for a simple job, not taking another ghost of a man running from something he wouldn't name. But then again, maybe that's what they all were now. Ghosts. Her daughter, the land. The next morning, she watched from the kitchen window as the cowboy, he hadn't told her his name, worked in silence. He didn't stop to rest, didn't even glance toward the barn where the water pump stood. Just dug into the dry earth, set new posts, pulled wire. The sun had barely lifted over the hills, but he already wore sweat like his second shirt. And still not a word. Her 8-year-old daughter, Beth, sat at the table picking at her cornbread. Her cheeks had thinned out in the past year. Too much loss. Too much silence. Just like her mama. Mara saw it every day, that growing hush in her girl's eyes. "Why don't he talk, Mama?" Beth asked softly, not looking up. "Some folks talk less when they're hurting," Mara said, kneeling beside her. "Don't mean they're bad." Beth nodded, still not eating. By the third day, the man had cleared nearly a quarter-mile of ruined fencing. Mara watched him collapse onto the ground when the sun dropped, hat pulled low again, legs stretched out like they couldn't hold him anymore. He didn't ask for more pay, didn't ask for anything at all, but something about the way he moved, the way he avoided eye contact, gnawed at her. That night, when she brought him a plate of leftover stew, he didn't look surprised. Just said, "Thanks," so quietly she almost didn't catch it. She sat on the steps, watching the stars rise behind the barn. He ate slowly, careful like he was afraid the food might vanish if he blinked. "I never asked your name," she said finally. He looked up, then down again. "Ethan. Just Ethan. Just Ethan." She waited, but that was all he gave. Mara sighed. "Well, Ethan, that fence has been falling for a year now. I kept thinking I'd fix it myself, but things kept happening." He didn't ask what she meant. Maybe he saw the weight in her shoulders. Maybe he saw the burn mark on the side of the house that she hadn't fully painted over yet. "My husband died last spring," she added quietly. Then the cattle started getting sick. Coyotes got 2 of her heifers. And one night, someone cut the wire clean through. At that, Ethan's brow twitched. Someone. She nodded. Don't know who, but they knew what they were doing. Ethan looked out toward the dark fields. His jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. "Beth don't sleep easy anymore," Mara added. "She hears things. I tell her it's just the wind, but truth is, I hear it too." The silence between them wasn't cold. It sat heavy but not hard, like two people who'd seen too much to fill the space with useless talk. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was lower than before. I could check the barn at night. Walk the fence line after dark if you want. She didn't answer right away. She didn't know if she should trust him. But then again, he was the first man who hadn't looked at her with pity or judgment in months. And Beth had smiled at him once, just for a second. That meant something. All right, she said, but I ain't got much if someone's after trouble. Ethan nodded. They won't find what they're looking for here. She didn't ask how he knew that. By the sixth day, Ethan had fixed more fence than she expected, and something else had shifted. He moved like he belonged now, at least a little. He spoke to Beth when she handed him water. He even gave a small smile when she asked if he'd ever ridden a bull before. Once, he said, never again. Mara started leaving the back door unlatched at night, just in case. She told herself it was for safety. But part of her, the part that still remembered being touched softly, wanted to believe someone was watching over them again. She didn't tell Ethan about the man who used to come by late, drunk, and angry. The one who'd claimed her husband owed him money before dying. The one who'd cornered her in the barn one night until she pulled a pitchfork on him. She didn't need to. Ethan watched the tree line like he expected something bad to rise out of it. That night, as the sky poured down quiet stars, Mara sat on the porch with her arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the wind rattle the tin roof. She saw a shape by the fence. Ethan, still out there. She wondered what kind of man worked after dark just to keep strangers safe. What kind of past made someone too quiet to speak, but still gentle enough to offer protection. And for the first time in months, she let herself cry without looking over her shoulder. Not because she was weak, but because maybe, just maybe, someone else was strong enough to stand beside her. The wind rolled across the land like it had a message to carry, whispering through brittle stalks of grass and catching loose strands of Mara's hair as she stood outside the barn, staring at the old fence line Ethan had fixed. Her breath came slow. The evening air had cooled, but she didn't move. That same heaviness was always sitting in her chest, even on quiet days. Even with Ethan out there, hammering and pulling wire like the weight on his shoulders was heavier than the tools he carried. Back when John was alive, the ranch still felt like something worth fighting for. He wasn't a perfect man, not by a stretch, but he'd worked the land like it was his blood. Mara could still remember how he'd sing under his breath while hauling feed or fixing a saddle. How he'd lift Beth into the wagon, tuck her under his coat when the wind got mean. But the fire had taken him in the middle of a storm. One lightning strike on the dry roof of the tack shed, and he was gone before Mara could even scream. After that, it wasn't just the ranch that was broken, it was everything. Beth had stopped talking for almost 2 weeks after the funeral. She wouldn't let Mara touch her hair or sleep in her own bed. She just sat at the kitchen table, quiet, tracing circles in spilled flour with her finger. The girl was tougher than she looked, though. She still helped with the hens, still whispered to the mare in the corral like she had all the answers. But some nights, Mara would hear her crying into her pillow, soft and muffled. And there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. Now, as Mara watched Ethan walking the east side of the property with his head low, she wondered what story followed him here. A man didn't get that kind of silence in his bones unless something deep was buried there. Still, she hadn't asked him. She figured if he wanted to tell it, he would. And if he didn't, well, they both had things they'd rather leave untouched. Beth had taken a liking to him quicker than Mara expected. It wasn't in the way of children latching on to a new father figure. More like she saw something in Ethan she understood. She started waiting for him to come back at dusk, sometimes sitting on the steps with a blanket and a cup of water. He never said much, just nodded to her and sat nearby for a few minutes before heading to the shed where he slept. But Mara noticed the way Beth smiled after those few minutes, like something quiet and good had been returned to her, even just for a while. By the end of the second week, Mara had to make a trip into town. Supplies were low, and the last of the flour was down to crumbs. She didn't like leaving Beth alone, not since the trouble last spring, but the girl insisted she be fine with Ethan nearby. That morning, Mara hesitated on the porch, half turning back toward the kitchen. "You sure you're okay?" she asked. Beth nodded, standing tall even though she looked small in the doorway. "He'll be here, right?" Ethan stepped up from behind the barn just then, a coil of wire over his shoulder. "I'll watch her," he said. "Ain't going anywhere." It should have felt like too much trust for a man she'd known less than a month. But Mara had learned to read people quick in the years since she married John, and Ethan didn't have that twitchy, unsettled air that came with men hiding things. If anything, he seemed like he was trying to disappear. Still, town always made her uneasy. It had since word got around that the ranch was struggling. Some neighbors stopped saying hello. Others lingered too long with their eyes, like they saw her as prey. There was one man in particular, Hank Sullivan, who used to deal cattle with John. A loud man with too many teeth and too many stories. He'd come around after John died, offering help with thinly veiled interest. Mara had turned him down flat, but that hadn't stopped the lingering looks. Sure enough, she ran into him by the feed store, leaning on a post like he'd been waiting. "Looking mighty tired, Miss Dawson," he said, flashing that half-drunk smile. "I'm in a hurry, Hank." "Always are, but sooner or later you're going to need help running that place. Land like that don't care if you're grieving. It just eats you up if you ain't got a man to fight for it." She stepped past him, but his voice followed her. "Don't say I didn't offer when it all goes to hell." The words hit her like dry spit on cracked earth. But she didn't stop walking. Back at the ranch, Ethan had taken Beth out to check on the hens and let the old mule out for a slow walk around the pasture. He didn't talk much, but he listened, and Beth needed someone who listened without asking her to explain everything. When Mara got back, she saw them standing by the fence, the girl showing him how she'd trained one of the hens to come when she whistled. Ethan nodded like it mattered, like it meant something, and Mara felt something shift in her just a little. That night, Ethan sat on the porch after supper, not eating, just sipping coffee. Mara sat nearby, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You got family somewhere?" she asked, her voice quiet. He paused. "Had a brother. He's gone now." "What happened?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, finally, war happened. Then the bottle. Mara nodded, not pressing. "Yours?" he asked, nodding toward the window where Beth's shadow moved past the curtain. "She's all I've got now." A long silence passed. Then Ethan said, "You're good with her. She deserves better than I can give." "She's got you," he said simply. "That's more than some ever get." Mara looked at him, then really looked. His face was sharp in the moonlight, worn but not mean. Whatever had broken him hadn't made him cruel, and that mattered more than anything. The peace didn't last long. The next night, Mara awoke to the dogs barking, wild and sharp. She ran to the door, pulling her rifle from behind the coat rack. Ethan was already out in the yard, barefoot, gun drawn, scanning the dark. "Fence near the creek's been cut," he said, breath short. "Tracks boot prints." Mara's blood turned to ice. "They're back." Ethan didn't ask who, just nodded. "They won't come in the light, but you need to be ready." She didn't sleep after that. Neither did Beth. Over the next few days, Ethan walked the whole property twice. He set tripwires, moved rocks to make noise if stepped on, started sleeping in the barn, closer to the open fields. When Mara brought him food, she found him carving something small into a piece of pine. A bird. The detail was delicate, precise. "You do this often?" she asked. "Used to. Helps settle my hands." She reached out, touching the bird with a finger. "It's beautiful." He didn't smile, just said so was she. And that's when she knew. There had been a woman, somewhere in his past, someone lost, someone who maybe still showed up in his dreams, soft and unreachable. They never talked about it again. But now, the threat wasn't just broken fences and old grief. It was something moving closer. And Mara, for the first time, felt fear not just for herself, but for what she might lose if the wrong man came looking. Because Ethan wasn't just fixing fences anymore. He was repairing something far more fragile. And that scared her more than anything. The first time Mara laughed in front of Ethan, it caught both of them off guard. It happened in the middle of a dry afternoon, while she was carrying a pail of water from the pump to the barn, her arms shaking from the weight and her patience stretched thin after chasing a stubborn calf for half the morning. Ethan had been up on the fence line hammering in a warped post, shirt clinging to his back from a heat, dust caked along his sleeves. As she passed, he made some offhand comment about her chasing calves better than half the cowhands he'd known. Then added, "Course, most of them didn't have your aim with a bucket." Mara blinked at him, lips twitching, and then, out of nowhere, she laughed. Loud and sudden, and something in Ethan's face changed, like the sound had peeled a layer off him he didn't realize he was still wearing. He ducked his head and gave a small smile, not looking at her, not needing to. It was just a moment, a second of light in weeks filled with heaviness, but stayed with her. The sound of her own laugh felt strange in her ears, like a song she used to know but hadn't sung in years. In the days that followed, more of those quiet moments started slipping in around the edges of survival. Beth began spending more time outside again, trailing after Ethan as he worked, asking him questions, pointing out birds, talking about things Mara hadn't even realized she still thought about. Beth trusted him in the unspoken way children do when someone's spirit feels safe. She'd even brought out her old rag doll one morning and shyly asked Ethan if he could fix the torn arm. He didn't say much, just took it with both hands and later returned it neatly stitched, the thread carefully matched. Beth smiled, so wide she didn't even hide it. Sometimes Mara would find herself looking out the window toward the fields, watching him move through the land like he belonged to it. He didn't just repair the fence. He fixed the stall door in the barn without being asked, helped her haul wood for the stove, even sharpened the dull blade on her kitchen knife, and didn't mention it. Every act was quiet, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But Mara noticed. She always noticed. One morning, she found a small carved wooden figure left on the porch. A rabbit. Smooth edges, round eyes. No note, no explanation. Just placed gently beside her coffee mug like a kind of offering. She hadn't seen Ethan nearby, but she didn't need to ask. The detail in the ears, the soft tilt of the head. It was him. She kept in the window by the sink. The land had stopped feeling like it was dying. There were still problems. The cattle were thin, money was tight, and the air always carried the taste of dust. But it didn't feel hopeless. That was new. The creek near the edge of the property had started to flow stronger again after a brief rain, and Mara walked there one afternoon with Beth. The girl ran ahead, laughing, her boots splashing through shallow pools. Mara sat on a rock and closed her eyes, listening to the water, letting the wind thread its way through her hair. When she opened them, Ethan was standing a little ways off, just watching them. Not intruding, not trying to be part of the moment, just witnessing it like it meant something. Mara met his eyes, and, without words, something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but the early shape of something that might become it if given time. That evening, Ethan didn't eat at the barn. Mara invited him to the table. Beth lit the lamp and placed a napkin down where he sat. It felt strange having a man there again, but not bad. Ethan ate slowly, quietly, like he didn't want to make too much noise in a house that had learned to live in silence. After supper, Beth brought out a book and curled up on the floor, flipping pages she barely read. Mara poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Ethan. "You always this quiet?" she asked gently. Ethan sipped the coffee before answering. "Not always. Just don't waste words much anymore." "You ever want to?" she asked. He didn't look at her, just said, "Maybe." Later that night, after Beth had gone to bed and the house had gone still, Mara stood at the door, watching the yard. Ethan walked past the barn, scanning the fence again. That man never seemed to rest. She stepped onto the porch and called out, "You know, there's no shame in sleeping sometimes." Ethan looked over, startled by her teasing tone. "I sleep, just not all at once." She stepped down and walked toward him, pulling her shawl tighter. "Do you ever stop moving?" He shrugged. "Stops don't end well for me." Mara paused beside him, both of them looking out over the moonlit land. I don't know what you're running from, she said softly, but you don't have to outrun it here. Not every day. He turned his head slowly toward her, eyes steady. What if it catches up anyway? Then we fight it off together. It was the first time she said we out loud like that, and it didn't feel like a mistake. Days blurred again, but they weren't as hard now. The fence was nearly complete, tighter and straighter than it had ever been. Ethan had even reinforced the gate and patched the back wall of the barn without asking. He still didn't talk much about himself, but Mara learned to read him in other ways. The way his jaw tightened when Beth mentioned men coming around at night. The way he always walked the perimeter twice before sunrise. The way his hands shook just a little when he thought no one saw. Beth had drawn a picture of him, stick figure thin, but smiling with a hat too big for his head. She showed it to Mara and said, "He's not like other men. He sees stuff." "What stuff?" "Stuff nobody else looks at. Like when the baby goat was limping, or when you were crying in the pantry that day." Mara had forgotten Beth saw that. One late afternoon, while Mara was mending a torn sleeve at the porch table, Ethan came around the house holding something behind his back. She raised an eyebrow at him. "What V you got there?" He pulled out a small tin and placed it in front of her. Inside were nails, a folded cloth, and 2 sharpened pencils. "For the work you're doing," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want something better than bits of chalk." Mara felt her throat tighten. It was such a small thing, but no one had thought of her needs like that in so long. Not since John. She looked at him. "Thank you." He dipped his head. "Wasn't much. It is to me." That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder cracked open the sky, and the wind slapped the side of the house like a beast. Beth came running into Mara's room, wide-eyed, clutching her blanket. "Can I stay here tonight?" Mara pulled her close and nodded. "Course you can." A minute later, they heard the barn door slam. Mara moved to the window and saw Ethan out there, try to tie it down against the wind. She grabbed her coat, and before Beth could stop her, she was outside in the rain. "You don't have to do everything alone," she yelled over the storm. Ethan turned to her, soaked to the bone, eyes burning with some deep, quiet fire. "It's just a door." "It's not about the door," she snapped. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Ethan stepped forward and said, softer, "I don't know how to do this anymore." "Do what?" "Be part of something." Mara's heart pounded. "Neither do I, but I'm trying, and I'm tired of trying alone." They stood there, drenched, as lightning split the sky behind them. And for the first time, Ethan reached for her hand. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't an embrace. It was just 2 hands meeting in the rain, holding tight against the wind. The storm passed by morning. The sun rose slow and bright, drying the earth, lighting up the porch in soft gold. Beth was already outside with the goats, humming again. Inside, Mara stood at the stove, frying eggs. Ethan came in quietly, pausing in the doorway. "You're welcome to sit," she said without turning. "I wasn't sure if I should," he said honestly. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "If you're here to fix a fence, then the job's just about done. But if you're here for something else, I could use the help." He stepped inside, sat down, took the coffee she poured without speaking. But the corner of his mouth twitched up. And that was enough. The ranch still had problems. The fence wouldn't hold forever. The money wouldn't stretch far. Trouble might still come. But something had shifted. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were people. Bruised, quiet, scarred but alive. And maybe, finally, healing. It started with the silence again. Not the good kind. The kind that had gently stretched between Mara and Ethan during the long days of fence mending and coffee at dusk. This was a different kind of quiet. Thicker, heavier, the kind that comes just before something breaks. Mara felt it first. Ethan was still there, still hammering boards, still checking the perimeter, but he'd stopped coming inside. Stopped talking at all, even in his quiet way. When she handed him his meals, he took them with a nod, eyes averted. When Beth asked him about the coyote tracks near the creek, he answered with short, careful words, like he was measuring every syllable before letting it go. At first, Mara told herself it was nothing, just a man pulling back to think. But by the 3rd day, she knew better. The distance in him wasn't new. It had always lived just under the surface. She just convinced herself it was going away. That evening, she stood on the porch watching him walk the fence line as the sun slid low behind the trees. She should have called out to him, told him to come in. That supper was ready. But something held her back. Something in the way his shoulders were tight, the way his hands were clenched even when they weren't holding anything. The air between them had changed. And the worst part was, she missed him. Not just the work he did, but him. The quiet glances, the carved gifts, the way he listened without needing to solve anything. She hadn't realized how much she'd begun leaning into the idea of him staying. The idea that maybe, for once, someone wouldn't leave. But Ethan was slipping away. He felt it too. At night, lying in the hayloft with only the sound of wind pressing against the boards, he stared at the rafters and told himself he was being a coward. But it didn't change the truth. He was scared, not of the land, or the fence, or even a man who might still be watching them from the hills. He was scared of needing something again. He'd let it happen before, back in Texas. A woman named Emma, who had a smile like sunlight and a house full of warmth. He thought maybe she was his place to land. But war had torn him apart, and by the time he came back, he was more shadow than man. Emma had tried. God, she tried. But he couldn't give her what she needed. Couldn't let himself be loved when all he felt inside was ruin. She left after 6 months. Left him with a note that said, "You're not broken. You're just scared, but I can't fight your ghost for you." He hadn't let anyone close since. Until Mara. And now, he could feel it happening again. That slow, dangerous pull toward hope. Toward belonging. Toward something he didn't think he deserved. So he pulled back. He avoided the kitchen. Stopped sitting on the porch. Told himself it was better this way. Cleaner. He'd leave soon. Finish the fence. Maybe patch the back shed. And go. That was always the plan. But then Beth got sick. It started as a cough. Nothing serious at first. Just a few dry hacks in the morning. But by the third night, she was shivering under her quilt. Cheeks flushed red. Breath coming too fast. Mara panicked. She stayed at Beth's side all night, sponging her with water, whispering prayers she hadn't said since she was a girl. Her hands shook as she touched her daughter's burning skin. Fear dug into her chest like a claw. In the early gray of morning, Ethan stepped into the doorway without knocking. "She's sick?" he asked. Mara didn't answer at first. Just looked at him, tears wet on her cheeks, hair a mess, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do." Ethan stepped closer, kneeling by the bed. He placed a rough, calloused hand against Beth's forehead, then to her wrist, counting her pulse. "Fever's high," he said. "We need water in her. Cold cloths. She's got to sweat it out." Mara blinked. "You've done this before?" He nodded. "My brother. He get fevers bad. Mama taught me what to do." They worked in silence after that. Mara fetching more water. Ethan keeping Beth's limbs steady when she thrashed. He didn't flinch when she coughed in his face. Didn't leave when she cried out. Just sat there, solid, hands gentle and sure. That night, as the fever began to break, Mara slumped against the wall and let out a sob that shook her whole body. Ethan reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. "I thought I was going to lose her," she whispered. "You didn't. I don't know how to do this alone anymore." "You're not alone." She looked at him then, and for a moment, it felt like something was repairing again. But when morning came, Ethan was gone. Not far, just walking the fence, but Mara felt the space between them like a canyon. She found him later in the barn, hammering a post with more force than needed. "You ran again," she said quietly. He didn't turn around. Didn't run. Just didn't want to make things worse. "You think helping me save my daughter made things worse?" He stopped, lowered the hammer, finally looked at her. "I don't know how to stay," he said. "Every time I've tried, I ruined things." "You didn't ruin anything." "I care about her," he said, voice breaking. "About you. That's the part that scares me." Mara walked toward him. "You think it doesn't scare me too? I've already lost one man. I can't do that again. I can't let Beth get used to someone who's going to leave." He looked down. Then maybe it's best if I go. You really believe that? I believe I bring more hurt than help. Mara's voice shook now. You're not the only one with ghosts, Ethan. I'm still terrified every time the wind howls that someone's out there. I still wake up reaching for a man who isn't coming back. But you being here, it's the first time this place has felt like home since John died. He closed his eyes. I can't promise I'll always get it right. I'm not asking for perfect, she said. I'm asking for honest. I'm asking for present. That night he stayed, not just physically, but emotionally. He sat at the table, ate supper, talked to Beth as she sipped her broth, told her about the time he got kicked by a mule and flew 6 feet into a water trough. She laughed until she coughed again, but there was joy in it. Mara watched from the kitchen, her heart heavy and light all at once. But just as things started to settle, trouble came back. One morning, while Ethan was out back, Mara found a note nailed to the fence by the creek. A crude message scratched on torn canvas. I warned you, women shouldn't run land alone. No name, no signature, but she knew who it was. Hank Sullivan. She'd hoped he'd moved on, but he hadn't. She showed Ethan that night. He read the note, jaw tightening. I'll talk to him, he said. No, Mara said quickly. That's what he wants. To scare us. You show up angry, he'll just push harder. He threatened you. He wants power. Attention. Don't give it to him. Ethan didn't argue, but that night he stayed awake by the porch with his rifle, watching the dark like a hawk. Mara sat beside him for a while, neither of them speaking, both afraid in their own ways. Later in the quiet, Ethan whispered, "What if I can't protect you?" She looked at him, moonlight catching the tired lines in his face. Then we figured out, together. It wasn't a clean solution. It wasn't peace, but it was something, and in that something, they found a place to keep going. They were still afraid, still uncertain, but they were no longer doing it alone. The morning it happened, the sky looked wrong. It was the kind of pale, heavy gray that made everything quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. Mara stood at the kitchen sink, staring out past the barn, coffee growing cold in her hand. She'd been up before sunrise, the same as always, but something in the air crawled under her skin. The wind was too still. The birds were silent. Even Beth, still curled in bed recovering from her fever, hadn't stirred. Ethan hadn't come in for coffee. That was the first sign. He'd taken a share in the morning with her. 1 cup, a few words, sometimes just a nod. It was their rhythm. But today he was gone. Mara stepped onto the porch, arms crossed against the cold that didn't quite match the season. She scanned the property. The fence was intact. The barn door was closed, but the feeling wouldn't leave her. She found him down by the old cattle chute, crouched low, rifle balanced across his lap. There's someone out there, he said before she could speak. Her heart kicked. You sure? Ethan's face was drawn tight, jaw clenched. Tracks near the west line. Fresh. Same boots as before. Hank's size. Mara felt the weight of that name again, sour in her mouth. Ethan looked at her, and this time his voice was softer, but colder too. He's been watching us. Waiting. I should have stopped him sooner. You didn't want to cause a war, she said. Ethan's eyes didn't leave the trees. I've already been through one. I know how they start. I know how they end. The way he said it, like he wasn't talking about guns or politics, sent a chill through her. Mara lowered herself onto the log beside him. Tell me what happened, Ethan. He didn't answer at first. Just sat there, hands wrapped around the barrel of the rifle like it was the only thing keeping him together. Finally, he spoke. My brother, Lucas. He was younger. Smart. Smarter than me. He wanted to be a teacher. But we signed up for the war together, thinking it'd make us men. It didn't. It made us hollow. Mara didn't interrupt. We got caught in a shootout on the edge of the Chihuahuan border. Wrong place, wrong time. Friendly fire, they said. But it wasn't friendly. I froze. I looked right at the man pulling the trigger, and I didn't move. Lucas took the bullet meant for me. He swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. He died in my arms. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't do anything. And after that, I stopped being a brother. I stopped being anyone. Mara's throat tightened. You didn't kill him, Ethan. I didn't save him. Silence stretched between them. Then Mara placed her hand over his gently, not trying to fix it, just being there. You saved Beth, she said quietly. You saved me more than once. That counts. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the weight of years seemed to fall off him in layers. Later that afternoon, while Beth rested and Ethan walked the northern fence, Mara returned to the barn to gather tools. That's when she saw the boot prints. Fresh, deep, headed straight toward the house. Her chest went tight. She didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel and ran back toward the house, every step pounding. Ethan, she yelled. He was here. Ethan appeared like a shadow from behind the coop, gun already in hand, eyes sharp. Beth's inside, Mara said, breath short. I'm going. No, Ethan interrupted. You stay outside. I'll clear it. She didn't argue. He moved fast, but quiet, checking each room with practiced hands. When he came back out, he shook his head. No sign of him, but he's close. That night, they didn't sleep. Ethan sat on the porch, rifle across his lap. Mara kept the lamps low. Beth clung to her mother's arm in the bed, wide-eyed, asking over and over if the bad man was coming. He won't get near you, Mara whispered. I promise. But she wasn't sure. It happened just before dawn. The creak of the gate, the scrape of boots on gravel. Ethan was already moving. Stay with Beth, he shouted behind him. Mara grabbed her own rifle, heart slamming in her chest, but stayed inside. She went to Beth, pulled her under the quilt, and held her tight. Through the window, she saw it. Hank Sullivan, standing just beyond the fence, shoulders hunched, shotgun in one hand, bottle in the other. I came to talk, he yelled, slurring. That's all. Just talk. Ethan stepped out into the open. You've been warned. Hank laughed, bitter and loud. Warn me? Who the hell are you? Just some much sleeping in a barn. Ethan's voice didn't shake. Leave now. This is your last chance. You think you're a man now? Hank yelled. Think you could just waltz in and take what's mine? She was never yours. Hank's face twisted. John owed me. He promised me part of this land. Then he died. And now she thinks she can just ignore that. You were taking what wasn't yours, Mara said suddenly. She had stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes locked on Hank. You scared me, cornered me, and you're doing it again. But I'm not alone this time. Hank's lip curled. You gonna shoot me, Mara? If I have to. For a moment, everything held still. Then Hank raised the shotgun. Ethan didn't wait. One shot rang out, clean and sharp. Hank stumbled back, dropping his weapon. He wasn't dead. Ethan had aimed for the leg, but he was down, howling in pain. Mara rushed forward, rifle still tight in her grip. Ethan stood over Hank, face like stone. You're gonna crawl out of here. And if you ever come back, I won't miss next time. Hank whimpered, trying to press his palm to the bleeding hole in his thigh. I'll sue you, he spat. I'll tell the sheriff. I already did, Mara said. I showed him the note. Told him everything. You're lucky I didn't let the law deal with you. By the time the sheriff arrived, Hank was barely conscious. He was taken in without much fuss. No one in town would miss him. When the house was finally quiet again, Mara found Ethan sitting by the barn, staring into the trees. She sat beside him. You didn't have to protect us like that, she said. Yes, I did. She leaned into him, shoulder to shoulder. You stayed. I almost didn't, but you did. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Ethan whispered, I keep hearing my brother's voice, telling me I still don't deserve anything good. Mara turned to face him. You do. You just have 188, have to let yourself believe it. Tears filled his eyes, but didn't fall. I'm scared I'll mess this up, he said. Scared I'll ruin Beth's trust. Yours. Mara placed a hand on his chest. Then don't run. That's all I ask. I want to stay, he said. Then stay. He leaned into her, head bowed. And for the first time, the weight didn't feel like it would crush him. He had faced the worst of himself and survived. The trauma hadn't vanished. The ghosts were still there. But now they were shared. And in the arms of a woman who had her own wounds, who had chosen to keep going, Ethan found the beginning of peace. They didn't speak of forever. They just spoke of tomorrow. And that was enough. The land healed slowly, the way all broken things do when tended with care and patience. After the shot was fired, after Hank Sullivan was hauled off and his shadow finally lifted from the ranch, a strange quiet settled across the hills. Not the kind that warned of trouble, but the kind that gave you room to breathe again. The kind Mara hadn't felt since before John died. She still woke early. Old habits didn't die, even when the nights were safer. But now, when she looked out the window in the morning, she saw something else. Ethan, shirt sleeves rolled, already walking the fence line. Beth, barefoot, chasing the hens around the coop with a giggle she hadn't made in months. The barn door swinging gently in the wind, the smell of hay and wood smoke drifting from the chimney. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Beth's fever had passed completely, leaving her thinner but bright-eyed again. She spent hours with Ethan now, asking him questions, begging him to teach her how to carve little animals out of scrap wood. He'd shown her how to use the blade safely, his hands guiding hers gently, patient even when she nicked her thumb and burst into tears. Mara watched from the porch one afternoon as he tied a clean strip of cloth around Beth's finger, whispering something that made her laugh through the pain. That laugh reached Mara's chest and bloomed there like spring after a long winter. Inside the house, everything felt softer, not because it had changed, but because the fear that once lived in the corners was gone. Mara found herself humming again as she cleaned the stovetop or shelled peas. She caught her reflection in the window once, smiling, and had to blink twice before realizing it was her own face. She hadn't looked that way in years. It was late one night when the quiet between her and Ethan finally shifted into something else. Beth had gone to sleep early, exhausted from chasing a wayward calf that had gotten into the garden. The moon was high, silver light spilling across the porch boards. Mara sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in her shawl, sipping the last of her coffee. Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, arms crossed, eyes on the sky. "She's strong," he said after a long pause. "She has to be," Mara answered. "This place doesn't allow much softness." He nodded. "Neither does the world." She looked over at him. His profile in the moonlight was sharp, almost carved from shadow, but his voice had softened lately. The edges were rounding, the guardedness fading. He let her see pieces of him, piece by piece, and she'd held each one carefully, never rushing, never pressing. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" "About building a new shed, one that doesn't leak." She smiled. "Is it your way of saying you're staying?" He turned to her then, and for once, he didn't look away. "If you'll have me." Mara didn't answer with words. She stood, stepped toward him, and reached up to touch his cheek. Her fingers were rough from rope and soil, but her touch was gentle. Ethan leaned into her hand without shame. And then, slowly, carefully, he bent his head and kissed her. It wasn't a hungry kiss, not rushed or desperate. It was slow and aching, full of everything they hadn't said, everything they had felt building over the weeks. Fear, need, comfort, trust. It felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Mara rested her forehead against his. "I don't need promises," she whispered. "I just need honesty." "You have that," he said, "for as long as I breathe." That night he stayed. Not in the barn, not on the porch. He stayed beside her, in her bed, their hands finding each other beneath the quilts. They didn't rush. There was no need. It wasn't about need anyway, not anymore. It was about choosing to be seen, to be touched not for comfort, but for truth. Their bodies met slowly, like a question asked and answered in silence. Every scar, every bruise, every past heartbreak was acknowledged in the way they moved, careful, attentive, reverent. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't have to be. It was real. When Mara laid her head against his chest afterward, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew without words. The worst was behind them. And still, life didn't stop asking more of them. There were still fences to mend, Still debts to reckon with. The garden needed replanting, the chickens never stayed put, and the well had started running low. But there was laughter now, and the soft sound of wood being carved at dusk, and a man's boots left by the door instead of far off near the barn. Beth had started calling him Ethan, but sometimes when she was especially tired, she let Pa slip out. The first time it happened, Ethan froze like he'd been shot. Mara held her breath, but then he crouched beside Beth and said, "Yeah, sweetheart." And Beth just grinned, her gap-toothed smile wide as the sky. Mara didn't say anything after that. She didn't have to. A few weeks later, a letter came in the post. Unexpected. It was from the sheriff's office. Hank had taken a plea. He wouldn't be bothering them again. Mara folded the letter and burned it in the stove. She didn't need reminders. She needed peace. That evening, Ethan took Mara and Beth to the creek. They hadn't gone in weeks. Beth skipped stones while Mara sat on the smooth boulder near the bank, skirts gathered up, feet dipped into the cool water. Ethan waded in halfway, pants rolled, sun casting gold across his shoulders. He came toward her, water splashing, and held out his hand. "Come with me." Mara laughed. "I've got enough water on the land to deal with." "Come on," he teased. "You used to dance in storms." "I can tell." She raised an eyebrow. "You can you? Call a hunch." She took his hand. They stood in the middle of the creek, Beth shouting with joy as a frog leapt past her boots. Ethan spun Mara gently, their feet slipping on river rocks, laughter bubbling between them like the water itself. It wasn't a waltz. It wasn't graceful, but it was theirs. That night, wrapped in blankets before the fire, Beth curled up between them, half asleep. Mara leaned into Ethan's side, and he pressed a kiss into her hair. "We're not broken," he said softly. "We're just starting again." She nodded. "And we're doing it together." It wasn't a perfect ending. The ranch still needed work. There were still storms ahead, droughts, and hard winters and animals that wouldn't stay penned. But there was warmth now, connection, safety. Mara planted new seeds in the spring. Ethan built a pen for a goat Beth named Clover. And sometimes at night, they sat on the porch and said nothing at all because nothing needed to be said. He was there. She was there. And that was enough. The land remembered everything, but it also forgave. And so did they. Their story didn't end with tragedy. It ended with a slow breath, a steady heart, a fence mended not just in wood and wire, but in love. And in the quiet hush of dawn, as the first light touched the roof of the little house on the hill, Mara turned in bed, tucked closer to the man beside her, and exhaled, finally, fully free.